We have new type challenges starting this week, so I'm going to break down the meta for you and tell you what I think is the best deck in the format. What's up everyone, it's Garrett with Talking Cards, and today I'm breaking down the meta. Right now in Gundam, we're in a unique spot. It's set 1, we're about to get our first competitive events that everyone can go to. We had first combats, but it was like very selective. The only one in the United States here was at Gen Con. So, knowing that these challenges, these new type challenges, are going to be the first events for many to win prize cards and to get a sense of the competitive scene, it's important to kind of like break down the lay of the land. And right now in Gundam, we are a circular meta. So what that means is one deck is advantageous into another, then that deck's advantageous into another, and it's just like each week any of these 4 decks can like pretty much pop up. Those 4 decks are Green White Wing 0, Red Blue Newtype Ping, we have Green Blue 1 Year War is what they call it, and then we have Blue White. So Blue White's interesting because it can be the Unicorn Tempo variant, or it can be the Blue White Blocker variant. And we've seen both decks do really well. I personally am starting to really like this Unicorn build. It took me a second to really think it had some chops because I've still always thought blue-white blockers to be a really good deck. I know it's fallen out of favor, but it doesn't change the fact that the deck can still really perform, get into its late game, and Freedom is still one of the best cards in the game, I think. So we're in an interesting spot where these 4 decks have really just kind of been the monsters of the meta and kept all rogue to the side. So knowing that information, how do we use that going into a new type challenge, and what should you play? Okay, so what I'm going to do is break down each deck's strengths and its weaknesses, what it's favored into, what it's not favored into, sort of thing, and give you guys a lay of the land going into the new type challenge so that you can pick whatever deck you think has the best spread and you feel comfortable with. That's the most important thing. What deck do I feel the most comfortable with from its spread and from how it plays and to the games you have on it? You know, reps are king, as always. However, I'll just still give you what I think about all these decks so that you guys can make a more informed decision. And I'll start with my favorite deck, Green White Wing 0. And I do believe this is the best deck in the format. And one thing that I think people overlook is the amount of keywords it has. It has First Strike, it has Breach, it has Blocker, it has High Maneuver, it obviously has Burst. Like, it just has so much going for it. It can play 6 HP bases. Like, it just does a lot of things. These things add up to a very controlled deck if we can get into the late game. Notice I said if we can get into the late game. The weakness of the deck is decks being able to be too aggressive and going underneath you. Meaning like a Gundam, Amuro, Gun Cannon Amuro. These things can cause a lot of problems because your opponent can leave a couple units up for the first few turns, come in with a Gun Cannon or a Gundam, attach Amuro, clear the base, rest your blocker, and then all those units can now go into your shields. That's where a game can kind of spin out of control sometimes. Not all the time, we still got plays for it, but it is, I would say, the weakness of the deck. However, knowing how to tech around your worst matchups is another strength as a player. And you should be doing this. You should be teching for your aggro matchup because it's your worst matchup, or you can do the opposite and say, man, this matchup's already so bad, I'm going to make sure I lock up all my other matchups so that the only deck I lose to is this. That's also an approach. I like to take more of a have no weaknesses approach and try to cut it down as much as I can, as long as it's not making me worse in other matchups that I'm strong against. So that's kind of my philosophy with that. And I do think Green White Wing 0 is the best deck and the deck I'm probably going to play most for new type challenges. But another deck I'd be playing is Red Blue Newtype Ping. Red Blue Newtype Ping is a very good deck. We haven't seen it, I guess, evolve pretty much since First Combat, when Ben and Daniel and Hayden all won their First Combat event with Red Blue Newtype Ping. The deck's kind of is what it is. You know, everyone, you can debate some bases and little things like that, how many 1-drops you play, but the deck is really what it is. The deck works based on pretty much being an aggro deck. It's low to the ground, it's very tempo, And then it comes in with Merida and Kshatriya and can ping some damage and clean up a lot of the board, because you also have pingers in the early game like Anksha and Gun Tank that you can set things up with. And then you get Amuro Ray, which gets to rest blockers, and you can, attack at shields. And this all sets up a lot of opportunity for yourself. As a player, there are quite a few lines with red-blue, and knowing how to navigate that and knowing when to do which ones, when to ping damage, when to rest something, when to attack shields, when not to, when to go for board. These are the critical decisions you'll have to make with the deck. Other than that, I'd say what is its weakest matchups. Blue-white blocker can be tough because they just can survive so long, and if they can survive, you get to an in-game state where you just can never do enough to win the game, I guess. And then I think green-white can be tough. If they're on 4 Striker Pack and they're on 4 Zoward and 4 Liverith, that can be tough. If they see any of that stuff early, it's really hard. Because it gets to a point where if they can get into the end game and they can use their Death Scythe well to get first strike and clear, let's say, a Kshatriya, and it didn't cost them anything really to do that, plus they ramped, and then they can have Wing Gundam 0 for if you go too wide at the end and try to dump your hand. That's tough. As a red-blue player, I will say you have to kind of put green-white on gotta have it, because if they don't have that Wing 0, you can just clean up and win the game. But if they have it, you're probably going to lose, and that's just kind of how it goes. But the strength of the deck also is its consistency, and I do want to talk about that for one moment, because I think when you're going into things like Newtype Challenge, it's Swiss, no top cut. Decks that are just super consistent, and you can pretty much know what you're going to get almost every game, and it's one of the more consistent decks. I think that's a huge merit into playing it. So if you like red-blue Newtype, I think it's a great pick, and I think it has a great spread. I don't think it's like incredibly unfavored into anything. I just would say slightly unfavored depending on builds into green-white and blue-white blocker. All right, next we have 1 Year War Rush, green-blue. This deck is very aggressive. It says that I'll pretty much be able to spam board, and you can't keep up with as many units as I'm playing every turn. And sometimes they're right. And by turn 5, you might just find that you've lost the game. So what is the weakness of this deck? Well, if you survive, or you just saw Zowert, Liverith, and all these blockers, and you find yourself that it's turn 5 and you still have 2 to 3 shields left, you'll probably win. Or at least you have a good chance of doing so. Green-blue really kind of starts to peter out after the first 5 turns, 6 turns. And that's, I'd say, the biggest weakness of the deck is kind of itself, or not seeing a Char Pilot. If that deck doesn't see a Char Pilot, it's really bad for them, because everything is kind of determined on using these Char-Zakus to have high maneuver, get around blockers, clear the first base, and then start putting the opponent into some difficult decision-making and, make them having to trade in certain ways that aren't as advantageous as it could have been for them. And high maneuver is just a tough thing to get around, especially when you hide behind the safety of a blocker. So that's kind of how green-blue works as a whole. Its weaknesses are definitely itself, and I would say opponent being able to stabilize, because your late game's just not so strong. Now, we've seen 2 different kinds of builds of this deck. We've seen one that's a little more mid-rangey, and by mid-rangey, I mean you're playing Show of Resolve. So you're saying that, at some point in the late game, I can still win as long as I can draw some cards and see more cards. And then there's another build that's just pure aggro. We're going to go underneath you and we're going to win by turn 5. And I don't think either one's right or wrong. The Show is more my play style, because I like not just feeling like I lose sometimes in the late game, and that's how that deck can feel like. It also feels like a deck where you're not doing enough sometimes. Like, your decisions, there aren't that many, it feels like. And I'm not discrediting it. I think aggro's usually in games one of the hardest styles to play, because it's very unforgiving. One mistake and you're done. And I still think that's true here. If you make a mistake with that deck, you're probably not going to win. It's not a very forgiving deck. Where blue-white, I would say, is like the most forgiving deck, because you can draw so many cards, and almost all your cards have a certain amount of utility to them. So that's kind of a primer on green-blue. So what's the deck's matchup spreads? I think it's favored into green-white. I would say it's not favored into red-blue Newtype pink, and everything else is just depending on starts and how it goes for you in your hand and everything. So I would say that's kind of the spread, strengths and weaknesses. And we'll move on to another deck that I think is really interesting, Blue-White Unicorn. and we'll call it blue-white freedom blockers. We have blue-white unicorn tempo deck that's been super popular for the past month. And then we have the blue-white freedom blockers, which was the original boogeyman of the format. We'll start with the unicorn deck. It's been super popular, even winning a 120-man event, the Eggman Online half case that I commentated along with Hayden and Risu. And that deck really just put on a great showing there. It went X1 in Swiss and then 1 in Top Cut. So it has a lot of merit to it and it's super strong. So what are its strengths? How is it able to do that? Well, it draws a lot of cards. 4 Overflowing, 4 Show of Resolve, and Boniger attaching to unicorn mode, and then that draws you a card. Then you can destroy it for the destroy mode and attach Boniger again and draw another card. So you get to like see the pieces you need, I'd say. The only problem with the deck, and this is the weakness now, is that it can sometimes lose to itself. And I know every deck can do that to some degree, but this deck feels like it doesn't have... If you don't have the pieces when you need them, it just feels like you're not doing enough. Because some of your cards just don't do enough without a pilot. Like Sword Strike isn't a great card if you can't attach a pilot to it. It's just a 4/3 statted and it costs a little too much to play it when you also can play just a Rezel. And if you don't see like a Rezel or a Gem in your early game, you're kind of not doing anything. And then if you're just having to spend those early turns, maybe with a Show of Resolve or just drawing, you're kind of in a weird spot where it's like your opponent could have done all these things and now you're playing catch up, which the deck can come back from, but you can just get in this weird spot where you're playing from behind and you really don't want to do that with that deck. So I would say that was its biggest weakness. It has a great spread into the format in my opinion. I really think it has a great spread. I'm trying to think what its worst matchup would be. I would say aggro getting underneath it. If it doesn't have the Sword Strike Hawk combo or Sword Strike Kira, you can get in trouble, you know, if you don't see your early game. Other than that, I would say that it's pretty favored. And it has a decent, I'd say, green-white matchup out of the blue-white variants, because there's no interaction really with Unicorn. And also as green-white, we have to play greedy sometimes, and the fact that they can just come down and get, you know, 2 rushers in 1 turn with Unicorn mode and then destroying it for destroy mode, that's 2 swings sometimes that are just enough to win a game. And those are kind of the things that really matter late in the game. So we can't be like as greedy as we want to. And we have to keep that in mind as a green-white player throughout the game. So it has a good spread. It's I'd say a consistent enough deck, but it definitely does have some polarizing hands where it can lose to itself. All right, so we'll end with blue-white freedom blockers. This deck was the original boogeyman of the format and really led to green-white's rise. It had a good matchup into blue-white blockers and kind of even took the deck out of the format. We don't see it as popularized as it used to be. And I think that's a shame because I think Freedom Blockers is still a really powerful deck. It's super consistent. It still gets to run 4 Show of Resolve, 4 Overflowing. It gets great pilots with Kira Yamato, Amuro Ray, Boniger. Like, you get a lot of good pilots. Your units are insane. Freedom's great high-end. You can run Unicorn Destroy mode as well. People usually play it out of 1 to 2 of. And the deck just has a really good late game as well as a great middle game. You still run Ale Strike. You still can run Perfect Strike. You have Rezels in the early game. You have Gundam from the starter deck that can come down with an Amuro Ray. You get Livrith, one of the best blockers in the game, especially early. And then you could run whatever 1-drop you want, or Zoer. I like 1-drops. Like, I would play Jim, or I would play Gun Tank personally over Zoer. But it's really preference at that point. And I would say the strength of the deck is that consistency. All the cards are just so good. It feels like it's like the best pile of 50 cards you can put together is that deck. The worst thing about it, I would say, is your green-white wing 0 matchup. That matchup can obviously be tough. It's why it's kind of fallen off out of the format, but it's not unwinnable. There are things you can do, I believe, to kind of make the matchup where you have a shot at winning, I should say. It is hard. I'm not going to kid you. It's tough. But there are things you can do to try to get there and try to give yourself a more favored matchup into it. And Freedom's honestly fantastic into it because green-white has no way of really interacting with Freedom. Best way is probably using high maneuver on a wing 0 and just going around it completely. But I would say that's your lay of the land. As far as this meta goes, heading into new type challenges, these are the 4 to /5 decks if you consider, blue-white variants, 2 different decks, which is, I'd say they are. These are the 4 to 5 decks that are going to dominate new type challenges. I don't expect to see some rogue deck popping out. I don't expect to see some random new homebrew just clean up all the new type challenges. This is the format and this is the meta heading into the new type challenges and even regionals. And people are going to play what they're more comfortable with. You could see tech cards being added to certain lists for certain matchups to try to help, maybe go into aggro better or go into control better. These cards do exist and will be probably key decision points for players as they navigate their new type challenge season and head into regionals. All right, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, share it with your friends, and best of luck to you all in the new type challenges. Thanks for watching.